talking about design, I think a lot of people say, well, it's a Chinese cleaver, it's a big rectangular blade. How much design really goes into it? And the truth is, a lot actually. Just like any other knife, all the little details like blade thickness and shape and weight and balance are really going to affect the performance of the knife. So talking about thickness, I mentioned that this blade has a distal taper, which means that it's thicker near the end and thins out over the length of the blade out towards the tip. As you can see, it's a relatively flat or straight-edged knife. There's some cleavers that do have big bellies in them, and like the sort of Western-style chef knives, they're made for doing that sort of rocking, rolling cut. This is clearly designed for vertical push and chopping, or the sort of hybrid up and down push cuts, which I like to use, or long slices. It's not a roly-poly knife, which is awesome in terms of how I like to use a knife, at least. So talking about the sort of flat sections of the blade, we've kind of got two flat sections, a relatively flat section back here at the heel and a relatively flat section up here near the tip that are joined by a slightly curved belly. So here I've got a light set up, and hopefully we'll be able to see the blade edge and contact with the board a little better. So let's look at the heel. So I've got tip down right now. You can see how much the heel comes up with the tip all the way down. So there's the heel down. You can see a pretty long section in through here. Not until about the midpoint here do we start to see a gap. So again, we've got tip down, heel down. Here's midsection. So there's the belly. You can see heel and tip both up. Here's the tip. There's tip down. You can see a little light coming through here, but this whole section up here is in contact. This is starting to get into the belly right around here. So there's heel down, tip up, heel up, tip down. So not a lot of change from heel down to tip down, but again, both sections, nice, big, wide, usable section in the tip. So we've got the area where the blade is thickest and most rigid near the back for doing the heavy work, and the area where it's thinnest and has the least resistance when cutting up near the front for doing some of the quick work. It really works very, very well. I feel like I've always got a lot of room when I'm working. I don't feel like I'm running out of kind of the sweet spot in the knife at any point. And the fact that you've got that little transactional curved section kind of keeps you from driving. I've certainly done it, but it keeps you from driving the tip of the knife into the board quite so easily, like you do when you've got a totally straight blade. One of the things that this cleaver has that a lot of others don't is a neck. Some people love it, some people hate it. I love it. But in later versions of this cleaver, I think the neck was deleted. They moved the handle up so that the end of the handle is even with the back of the blade, which is more traditional style. But I kind of like the Japanese-American fusion thing going on here. We've got a Chinese-style knife. Well, I guess it's a Japanese version of a Chinese-style knife made by an American guy, which is kind of cool. And I really like the nice wide neck we've got here. Kind of an interesting thing to note is that the famous CCK that everyone loves so much, you think of this as not having a neck, but really, if you think about it, this goofy, ferrule, crimped piece of metal here really functions as a neck. When you look at where the actual wood on the handle ends, it's pretty close in size to where the wood on the Devin Thomas ends. So this sort of, I guess we've got about a finger width here between handle and back of blade, and gives you a nice place to hang on here, and gives you a nice place to hang on here. So when I'm talking about the neck, what does that mean in terms of grip and comfort and ergonomics? Well, I guess we can kind of start from the back when we're talking about handle and grip. One of the ways I do grip this sometimes is all the way back with maybe just an edge of my index finger kind of just hanging on here. And that's one of the things that's so nice about having this both sort of rounded so that it's comfortable, but still left with enough of an edge there that you can get a positive purchase on it and not feel like you're going to be slipping off. So I use this for a lot of pull cuts. Sometimes if I'm going to go down and do a horizontal slice, I'll kind of grip a little bit further back to get my fingers out from between the knife and the board. Moving up, sort of the classic pinch grip works really well, right on that nice wide neck, nice big chunk of metal to hold on to there. And then maybe a more aggressive grip, and this is probably the one that I use the most, is kind of with my middle finger hooked underneath here, resting in this space here, and then a pinch grip a little bit further up. So really I'm controlling the knife with 3 fingers. I've got it locked in, and then the rest, the back 2 are just kind of along for the ride and to help stabilize, and they're just kind of spread out. So this is certainly I think the grip I use the most. The nice thing about having a nice tall blade like this is that even with big hands you can really stretch out and not feel like you're going to accidentally get a tip of your finger underneath the edge. I guess moving further forward, we've got the peace sign grip. So the 2 fingers on the blade, the thumb up, getting even more control. This is really bringing your pinch pretty close to the balance point of the knife. And then, what is this, ring finger hanging on back in that little area. Again, one of the nice little details that were put into this knife is that it's, you probably can't see this on film, but this section right here where the neck is considerably thicker than the area right in front of it. If you run your fingers over it, you can feel it, that we're thicker here, and then we've got a drop right there, down maybe, I don't know, 1/2 millimeter, and it thins out pretty quickly from there out. But what that means is you've got a wider piece of metal to hold on to, but also that edge that you're going to be coming in contact with the most, especially underneath here, is a little bit wider than the blade. So when that's resting against your thumb, that really is something you notice over time, is that that's comfortable, where a lot of knives aren't under there. So where was I? Anyway, we're talking about the sort of 3 finger, and I've even gone kind of crazy if I'm doing sort of a real fine mince. Sometimes I'll come way up and just kind of hang my pinky on back there and grip something like this, and it really feels like your hand is sort of centered in the knife then, and you can really sort of move it radially pretty easily. All right, talking about weight and balance. One of the tests that I see a lot of people do is the kind of teeter-totter, balance on the finger this way test. I think that's kind of awkward for a cleaver because the blade's so tall, it's kind of hard to balance it with the handle. And also, that's not how you're going to be using the knife, so why try to balance it that way? I like to do a kind of pinch balance test. So where along the blade do I need to hold before it doesn't feel like it's falling one way or another? And for me, on here, it's right about there, which is pretty far forward. I mean, obviously it's a cleaver, it's going to be a blade-heavy knife, that's kind of the whole point. But it's not as far forward as you'd really think. And a lot of that has to do with the amount of steel in the handle, and the fact that this is a really big, long, heavy, dense wood handle. You know, ebony is a hard, dense wood, and it's thickest out here near the end too. So that's going to kind of counterbalance some of that weight and give you, your center of gravity right around this thick, heavy-duty working section here. So obviously, this is a blade-heavy knife. That's kind of the point of a cleaver, is to use that extra sort of mechanical advantage of having some extra weight out near the tip to help drive the blade through the product. It takes some getting used to, but it means that you don't have to work as hard at driving that edge through the product. Some lighter, thinner knives that I've used, I've noticed that when you get going really, really fast, and you're trying not to really whack into the board too hard, you're kind of trying to save that edge a little bit, you might get some stalling. So it's, you're going through, and then it's kind of a where you hit a section of the product that's maybe a little bit firmer, or there's a little more resistance on the edge, and it'll kind of stall and won't cut all the way through, and you kind of lose your rhythm. I never noticed that happening with this. I feel that as long as I kind of do my work in lifting the blade up and getting product underneath it, that when I go to make the cut, it's going to travel the rest of the way. So talking about the steel, AEB-L. It is kind of a super stainless. It's not a powdered steel. It is a Swedish stainless steel that was developed for razor blades. I'm not a huge stainless steel fan. I've got a lot of stainless steel knives because, you know, they're easy to care for and they work. But in terms of, you know, when I'm really, you know, get the weak in the knees, you know, itch in the pocketbook feeling for is, you know, the carbon steel, the blue and white, and you know, the super steels and the exotic blends and the you know, 52-100s, all the you know, really sexy sounding carbon steels, and they have kind of a feel to them. They've got some character. They've got a little bit of flex. The way they cut is really nice. The way they sharpen is really nice. And I just generally feel that stainless is a little soulless, maybe, or a little sterile compared to that. Like, it doesn't have the same personality. If that makes any sense. All that said, this kind of changed my mind about stainless. I really love this steel. You know, the advertising is that it's very carbon-like, has a lot of the same characteristics of carbon steel, and I think that's really true. I think it's a case where the, you know, the marketing or the advertising was really just truth and not hype. It sharpens just about as easily as anything I have. I mean, the steel just cuts really, really nicely with the stones. You get just a screaming sharp edge really quickly on it, and it holds up really surprisingly long time. That big video I did before where I cut up, you know, buckets and buckets of stuff, I don't think I sharpened the blade once throughout that entire process. I really don't get a big issue with rolling on this or chipping. It just works, and it keeps, I think, that first very sharp edge. If we call that the first 10%, you know, if you've got a freshly sharpened knife is at 100%, that, and as the knife dulls, it's going from 100 down to 0%. So that first 100 to 90%, I feel like this holds on to. It holds that super fine edge maybe a little bit longer than some of the other steels. I've noticed that some steels tend to lose that first 10 to 20% pretty quickly, but then really hold on to the remaining, you know, 85 to 80% for a much longer time. This, I feel like, keeps that first edge a little longer. In terms of the wear past that, maybe there's not a big difference. In terms of sharpening, I've noticed that sometimes when I put a really fine polished edge on a knife, so you're going over, you know, with very, very high grit stones and then stropping on leather and balsa using, you know, diamond sprays and things like that, you get just a beautiful mirror edge, but it can kind of slide around on the product sometimes. You know, that edge is so fine that it wants to kind of glide around versus really bite and cut in, because it doesn't have those little micro serrations, those little teeth. You've polished all those off. For whatever reason, I haven't experienced that with this steel yet. I've taken it to just that crazy, screaming sharp, hair popping, afraid to touch it, you know, falling through paper kind of edge, and it still has an aggressive quality to it. It still kind of has a bite and wants to cut through. Never kind of has that skatey, doesn't want to dig in kind of feeling to it. Not something I've really seen with many other steels outside of carbon, and super cool, like it. So final thoughts. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of the Devin Cleaver. But people have asked me, is there anything that kind of at first I didn't like, or anything that I'd change about it? And I've really racked my brain. I mean, over the few months that I've had this, I've really come to love it. You know, I liked it right off the bat, and I've just come to appreciate all the little details more and more, and I've gotten used to it and more comfortable with it. Maybe if you'd asked me when I first picked it up, I would say that the flared handle and the sort of handle orientation in regards to the blade kind of threw me off a little bit. The fact that it's flaring out means that this section right here is further from the edge than the back of the heel here, because it's getting wider, so it's getting closer to the edge. So that kind of made me feel like the blade was riding kind of high in my, like kind of tip high in my hand, the way that I was holding it before. But, you know, after using it and getting comfortable with it, I realized that I liked that. So I've really tried to come up with something that I didn't like, or something that I would change, and I haven't been able to do it. You know, are there things that other knives or other cleavers do better in certain tasks? Of course, but